Rhett Lewis here with Cameron Wolfe and Nick Shook as we wrap up our roster reset series by taking a look at the AFC South, looking at offseason moves as we have done for all 32 teams and draft needs as we are nearing the start of the 2022 NFL Draft live from Las Vegas, April 28th. And a reminder that you can read more on the roster reset series over on NFL.com/roster reset. And there, you will find our good pal, Nick Shook, lending his brain and literary prowess to all of the teams in the AFC over on NFL.com. Okay, so we've split up the teams here. Cam's going to take the Titans and the Jags. Nick, you're taking the Colts and the Texans. And with that, then let's start with the Colts, Nick, a team that had an opportunity, to get into the playoffs in the final week of the regular season, but obviously just completely fell apart there. Carson Wentz is now gone. You got Matt Ryan coming in. What kind of grade are we giving the Colts?
From a Colts fan perspective, it's like a home run. It's an A plus. But from my perspective, it's great that you replaced Carson Wentz with Matt Ryan, right? Because that's the upgrade. You got rid of what Jim Irsay has not been very bashful about believing that, was the problem. Carson Wentz was the issue. They realized they needed to move on. They upgrade with a veteran who they know can step in right away and make a difference behind a solid offensive line. But my issue is that I still need to see, another playmaker or two. You got T.Y. Hilton lingering out there. I don't know if that ends up being, a reunion or not. If you look at this receiver depth chart, Paris Campbell from my alma mater, St. Vincent St. Mary, and went to Ohio State. He's a burner, but he hasn't been able to stay healthy. So
Yeah.
You don't have a ton to count on beyond Pittman in the receiving core right now. And so you can, one of my biggest addition/signings was retaining Mo Alley Cox because of what he brings to that offense. But if that's in my top three, now, of course, you went out and got Yannick Ngakoue on the other side of the ball. But if that's your top three in terms of playmakers, and I know you have Jonathan Taylor and you got Nyheim Hines, both two very good backs. Taylor, one of the best backs in the league. I just need one more guy. And so to that point, it's like a B plus, somewhere in that range, because if we compare it with the grades we gave in the other division, I gave the Browns a B plus because getting Watson potentially transforms their franchise. Matt Ryan doesn't have that much football left in him. Not saying he can't play well, because I think that he has been unfairly criticized for Atlanta struggles. I think he's been one of the brighter spots in an otherwise dim last couple of years there. And I think he's going to step in and do great. And he's probably going to be the guy that Carson couldn't be, which is the guy that can get them to the playoffs. And, let's not forget, 5 weeks left in the season last year, we were talking about the Colts as a potential Super Bowl favorite before they ultimately missed the playoffs. Matt Ryan's going to get them there. Do they have the strength otherwise? I don't know if that's true at this point. Now, they can do pretty well in the draft. Chris Ballard loves to do that, but they got to get a little bit better in terms of roster. To this point right now, it's incomplete, but it's pretty close to being complete.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. And look, again, the Colts without a first-round pick, one of those 8 teams as a result of the trade to acquire Carson Wentz, but they did get some of that capital back, getting a second and third to send him off to the Washington Commanders. So we'll come back to the Colts on draft needs here in just a little bit, but let's get to you, Cam, now on the Tennessee Titans. Obviously a perennial contender these last few years with Mike Vrabel as the head coach to win this division and get into the postseason as they did this last year. How do you feel obviously the receiver turnover was one of the big pieces of this offseason. How does that factor into your grade?
Yeah, I'd probably give him a C, honestly. I think that, you look at what we've talked about in the AFC and everything's changing over. You get the Browns making their big move. You see all of these teams loading up, the whole AFC West preparing for an arms race. And the Titans just sort of stayed the same. And so you swap out Julio Jones for Robert Woods, which I think is an upgrade because you can't count on Julio to stay healthy. But at the same point, you got a sinking cost in the money situation for the dead cap situation for Julio. So it limits what you can do going forward. I did like the move to get Austin Hooper. Maybe he bounced back to the tight end he was a couple of years ago in a scheme that really prioritizes tight ends. They've needed that tight end really since Delaney Walker left. And so that should help as well. But I think they still need one more playmaker, and they didn't do enough for me to upgrade that offensive line. Ryan Tannehill was the second most sacked quarterback in the league, only behind Joe Burrow. And the only really notable move they did was re-signing Ben Jones, their center, which I think was a good move, but they need to do more on the offensive side of the ball to protect Ryan Tannehill and create those lanes for Derrick Henry. I'm a big believer in their defense. I love them re-signing Harold Landry. Some of the analytics sites were torn on whether or not he was a value there, but I think that the trio, really the quartet of rushers with him, Jeffrey Simmons, Danico Autry, Bud Dupree, is really what made the Titans the team they were down the stretch. So I think they'll be really good next year, but I think there will be still a natural step back because of all the AFC teams and because I don't think they made a big enough step. And the quarterback will always be the question: is he good enough to lead you to where you need to be? I think the C is the right grade for them.
Yeah. Do you feel like the Titans have that answer with Ryan
I don't.
Tannehill?
I think they're going to be stuck with him in 2022. His contract is guaranteed, so the check's going to clear
Yeah.
regardless. But this is a team, and I know I've mentioned this a couple times this offseason. Titans fans have gotten their feelings, but I wouldn't be shocked if they sat there at 29 and found a quarterback they loved. If they decided to go ahead and make the plunge. Like, you have to start thinking about the future. This is a team that just gave extensions to both Mike Vrabel and John Robinson. So you get a level of security. And when you have that level of security, you can start thinking long term rather than just now. So although this is a team that they're in their core window, they have to decide, like, how much do we sacrifice the now for the future? So I definitely think they will evaluate quarterbacks. Now, this might not be the right class. Maybe they wait another year, but I think they are starting to get the realization that, hey, we have to prepare for life after Ryan Tannehill, regardless of what they're saying publicly about how he's still their guy.
Cam, how
Yeah.
many people have gotten in your mentions about Ryan Tannehill and pointed to the fact that the Titans still managed to lock up the number 1 seed in the AFC without Derrick Henry for the half the season?
Oh,
I'm not saying I'm
yeah.
saying this.
No,
but I know
a bunch of people. Anytime I mention quarterback anywhere near the top of the draft, they're like, "We're the 1 seed next year. We just need one more weapon. We need one more this." And I'm like, on paper, yes, but football is not played that way, right? Everybody else catches up. So I was a big believer of the Titans last year. I was championing the boat when nobody cared about them, but I also understand the reality of how they play football is not necessarily conducive for them to continue to win a lot of these shootout games like they did last year. So when you lose a game in the AFC playoffs where you have 9 sacks of Joe Burrow, and the reason you lose is because your quarterback threw 3 interceptions, to me is the big blinking lights that, hey, we got to get better at this position. So I don't see them getting better immediately this year, but I do think they know deep in their hearts, even if they don't admit it, the front office, the head coach, they know that, hey, we're going to eventually have to get an upgrade from Ryan Tannehill.
See here, and I thought Browns aficionado Nick Shook was going to level an opinion on Austin Hooper, who comes over after a big contract with the Cleveland Browns to now join the Tennessee Titans. But perhaps you're right, Cam, and he can get back to that form we saw his final year with the Atlanta Falcons. Okay, let's come back to you now, Nick, with a look at the Houston Texans, who sent Deshaun Watson somewhat finally on his way out of town and into Cleveland. They get 3 first-round picks in return, in addition to a little sugar in that deal as well, and now have 2 first-round picks at 3 and number 13 overall. So, look, obviously that big subtraction is an addition in draft capital. How does that factor into your grade?
Well, for a team that was struggling to have any draft capital on the heels of the Bill O'Brien era, this is huge. This is how you jumpstart a rebuild, is by getting a ton of capital at the top of the draft. They have to hit on those picks, of course, and you have to hope that Nick Caserio does so. But otherwise, the biggest move they made this offseason was convincing Brandon Cooks to stick around, because they are still, when you look at them on paper, they're still lacking in talent. I closed this section of the roster reset with a list of positions they could still address, and ... you get the drift. I mean, there's still a lot of holes to fill, but what it really does too is it takes away the constant questioning about Deshaun Watson, which will be a load off of, Nick Caserio. It'll be a load off of Lovie Smith, something he won't have to deal with in his first season as the head coach there. And more importantly, it's got to help Davis Mills a little bit, because he finished strong down the stretch. They tuned out the noise. He was basically given the keys, knowing that the season was headed nowhere and that the best thing they could do was help him develop. But now that we're going into this season, it seems the Texans believe in him. And though they haven't surrounded him with a ton of talent, keeping Cooks is a big part of it. And it allows him to kind of take that next step. We all talk about year 2 jumps and how guys make this huge jump and the game slows down and everything. Davis Mills is in a pretty solid situation for that, with all things considered. So, I mean, grade wise, I don't know, you get maybe a C plus, because you didn't make a ton of splash moves. But
A lot
that's
of
not where
depth
they are right now. The
pieces.
road is
Yeah.
long, you know?
Yeah. I think
Yep.
that's a fair point too. And if an edge rusher is their choice at number 3, perhaps they come back with a wide receiver at 13. We'll dig into that here a little bit. But let's finish this up here, Cam, with a look at the Jacksonville Jaguars, who are drafting number 1 overall for the second straight year. Again, we'll get into those draft needs here in a moment. But in terms of other additions, they went out and spent with GM Trent Baalke on the first couple of days of the free agency frenzy. What kind of grade does that get them?
Yeah, money, 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 man. I wish I was someone that could interest the Jaguars in some services. The way they were handing out money.
No income
Um,
tax.
so initially, when I first saw their free agency period, I was a little worried about the value they gave out. But the more it sat on me, I realized just how far away this team is contending. You have to overpay some people, and so I liked a lot of the moves they made, even if I didn't love the value. So I think overall, I give them a B, because I think that this team was in desperate need of players. And so when you look at the players they brought in, I really like a Darius Williams they brought in, which was an undercover signing for them to help that cornerback position, and really shine there. I liked Evan Ingram signing for them. We really looked at how Doug Peterson used tight ends in Philly with Zach Ertz, with Dallas Goedert. I see no reason why, if everything works out, that Evan Ingram can't be the Duval version of Zach Ertz, there, if he becomes a little bit more reliable as a pass catcher. So I like those moves. They made some really good splashes on the defensive side of the ball. Obviously, they have their first round pick. I think this team will be noticeably better. I don't think they're close to being a playoff team, but I think you get more talent, you get a grown up in the building running the program, and Doug Peterson, and things should start building the right way. And so I like that they focused on building around Trevor this offseason and doing with their actions, but also building up the depth of their team, because honestly, that team talent, even with Urban Meyer's dysfunction, they were talent wise the worst team in football last year too. So it's something be said about just simply adding talent, coaching up the guys you have, and seeing how it works.
Yeah, look, and I think a lot of people want to talk about, overspending. Oh man, I can't believe you paid that much money for Christian Kirk. Well, look, everybody overpays in free agency.
Yep.
That's just the cost of doing business. And
Yep.
so when you need to plug holes like that in free agency, you're going to spend that kind of money. That's just the way it is. And so that's
Yep.
why teams would prefer to build through the draft, where it is more cost effective and where players are under, a bit more cost control. So that's just the way the NFL is here at this point. So let's get to the
Yep.
draft then. And Nick, let's come back. Well, actually, you know what, Cam? Let's just continue right there with the Jags, because they lead this
Okay.
thing off here at number 1 overall for a second straight year. We've kind of gone back and forth on tackle or edge rusher there at number 1 overall. I could make a case for both. How do you see it?
So I am of the opinion they should still go offensive tackle. And so I know that the board has shifted more towards the Aiden Hutchinson, and more recently seen some Trayvon Walker buzz, which I'm just not on board with, but that's just me personally. But I just feel this whole offseason was about building for Trevor. And so if that's your most
Yeah.
important piece, that's your franchise piece, I wouldn't let the bad decisions to franchise Cam Robinson change the trajectory of my franchise decision. So whether it's Evan Neal, whether it's Icky from North Carolina State,
Yeah.
I don't see you going wrong there with that number 1 pick. Slot him in at left tackle. If you need to put him at guard for one year while you have Cam Robinson there, cool. But I don't think any team's ever been disappointed on building their offensive line around a quarterback. And we've seen it year and year again, particularly recently, the value of having a competent offensive line. So ultimately, I obviously don't think the drop off, when you talk about drop off from the edge rusher class from the top of the first round, top of the second round, I think that's a lot smaller than the drop off of the offensive tackle class. So you go get one of the top offensive linemen at 1, and you come back there at 33, and maybe a guy like a David Ajobu is still sitting there, or a Boye Mafe, someone of that realm that can get you that edge rush ability that you need. So that would be the route I go.
Yeah, that's interesting because, people want to say, well, they just franchise tag Cam Robinson again. Well, yes, but that's good for 1 year unless they work out a
Yep.
long-term deal with, which it doesn't seem like that's something that's a huge priority here at this point. And so if he ends up leaving after this next season, Well, then you've got another potential replacement there at left tackle, along with a guy like Walker Little, who they drafted last year on day 2.
Yep.
Okay, so yeah, that's the case for the Jags, but I also wouldn't be shocked if Aiden Hutchinson is the pick.
Yeah.
Like
Oh,
I've called this
absolutely.
thing a 300-yard drive straight down the fairway at TPC Sawgrass.
Yeah.
Like it's just one that can't miss.
Yep.
He's the safest player in the draft, so I could definitely see it from that perspective as well. Nick, let's go to the Texans, who are sitting right there at number 3 overall, and also at 13. If Davis Mills is our guy, as Lovie Smith has said, are these picks about supporting him?
Yeah, I feel like this isn't the draft to replace Davis Mills with somebody. Let's give him another year and address the many other needs elsewhere. And I think, in this class that we just Cam just talked about, the depth of edge rusher being one of those positions. I think it's Kayvon Thibodeau. I think that's the guy that you bring in to put on a defensive front that needs that kind of impact player. Whitney Merciless moved on last year. You've lost, JJ Watt 2 years ago, or before last season as well. You need to restock that with some young talent. That's kind of a big name as well. I mean, like we said before, there's a lot of areas they could go. They have a ton of needs, but I think at that top selection, you go with probably the second best edge rusher in this class. And then, fortunately for them, they have a franchise left tackle in Laramie Tunsil, who's getting, better with each year and is getting paid like it. So they don't necessarily need to go to that position to address it. I think they could go best player available, as you guys said. It's always best player available. And I think that's going to end up being Thibodeau, Thibodeau was a guy we were talking about, maybe a year or two ago as being number 1 in the draft before Hutchinson rose. And so I think you get that out of that.
And
Go ahead.
Thibodeau seems like a player that, to me, you get the overthought of players in this draft.
Yes.
Because they've been in the class for so long, we've heard their name. You start picking at him. Oh, well, he doesn't have the character or the personality, the maturity. Like, sometimes dudes just ball. I remember they did that to Justin Herbert, and we'll look at it now. So, to me, Kayvon Thibodeau is going to be one of those guys a year or two from now. We're going to wonder, why did he go? Why didn't he go 1? Why did he go, as low as he did? And just, it's going to seem foolish.
Yeah. And to that point, Thibodeau has been getting picked apart since he was a high school sophomore at Dorsey in LA, before he even transferred to Oaks Christian, before he chose Oregon. And then he's been getting picked apart because he said he chose Oregon because of the business opportunities, because he was thinking, beyond college, because of the Nike branding and everything else. He's going to be a good player. It's really hard to argue otherwise. The motor question, I guess, is there. I think once he gets to the NFL, he's going to prove everybody wrong.
Yeah, certainly could be. And if that's the pick, what if edge rushers go 1 and 2? Is Kayvon Thibodeau the highest guy on the board at that point, or for Nick Caserio, do one of those top 2 tackles? If you have your choice of Evan Neal or Ike Ekwonu there, does Nick Caserio have them slotted just ahead of Kayvon Thibodeau? I think will be the ultimate decision point there for Caserio. And look, I'm just telling you, if Garrett Wilson or if Drake London is available there at 13, I don't think they will be. Jameson Williams might be. There's a lot to think about there from the wide receiver spot at 13 overall for the Texans.
Yeah, you can get a ton of value at the position, in this draft, especially there. So I think, you can't go wrong at 13. They really shouldn't fret about that at 13 at all.
No.
Oh, exactly right. Exactly right. It's a great spot to be in there for that team. All right, let's move back to the Tennessee Titans here, Cam, who pick at 26 overall in the first round. Where do you see that going? Is that an offensive line thing? As you mentioned, one of the perhaps areas where they were a little light in terms of offseason acquisitions.
Yeah, I think this makes a lot of sense for offensive line. I think it's got to be on the offensive side of the ball. You either go get you a top playmaker that you love, or you go get an offensive lineman that's secure protection for them. So they're picking 26, so they're a little lower in the draft. You're probably going to be looking through your end of your first round grades, some second round grades there. This is a lot of times where you got to decide, hey, do you want to take a little bit of a project offensive tackle, or do you take a guard and more positional value there? I mentioned his name earlier, but Kenyon Green is a guy that I think they like a lot. He could fill a guard spot for them. Do you take a guard there in the late first round if he's available? I don't see any issue with that. We're seeing what guards are getting paid these days in free agency. That position is no longer a luxury position. That's becoming a premium position going forward. So I could definitely see them pulling the trigger there. Maybe a guy like a Bernard Raymond from Central Michigan, if you wanted to take, that type of player in the late rounds there. They tried with Isaiah Wilson a couple of years ago. It didn't work out, but they need somebody to fill that right tackle spot. It's been a revolving door there as well. And I'd love to see them with another a fun playmaker if the offensive lineman is not there. If Treylon Burks is there at 26, imagine him
Burks,
and AJ Brown and Robert Woods all on the field together. That would make the Titans offense fun for the first time in a long time. So I can imagine that, and guys couldn't load the box up for Derrick Henry anymore. So that would be a fun pick for me to see if it was an offensive line.
I think in terms of offensive line, their opinion on Dylan Radins, their second round pick last year, will probably factor into that choice there. Does he slide in?
Yep.
At right tackle, I think it will be one of those decision points. Yeah, what do you got, Cam?
And so on Dylan Radins, I actually talked to a couple of their coaches this offseason, and the general consensus I got was they felt like he wasn't ready to be penciled in as a starter yet. And so they were like, hey, this is a challenge to him. Prove us wrong. This offseason proved that you can take one of those starter spots. But they said as of what they've seen for so far, he still needs some development. So, I think a lot of these, you're probably not going to find a rookie who's going to be super developed there at 26 either. So they're probably in a rock and a hard place. But I don't know if they're going in saying Dylan Radins is for sure a starter for us. So a lot more questions at that spot. If you remember, they ended up releasing what's the guard's name, the veteran guard that they
Roger Saffold.
Yeah, Roger Saffold. So that's another spot that needs to be filled as well. So multiple offensive line spots. Maybe Dylan Radins fills one, but I definitely think they need to still go get another one.
Yeah, by the way, Kenyon Green's played all over the offensive line for Texas A&M. So he's not just a guard, even though that might be what he's best suited for at the next level. Could help as a versatile piece as well. Let's finish this off here. Nick Shook with the team without a first-round pick in this division. That is the Indianapolis Colts, who will join the party as it currently stands now with the 10th pick of the second round, number 42 overall. What do you got there for Chris Ballard and the Colts?
Yeah, there's about 31 picks in between their second and third round picks. So, you don't have a ton of luxury in terms of, well, let's play the situation this way. Let's get this BPA here, and then maybe we address a need lower down. They got to basically, identify, I think, a mix between best player available and needs. And if you look at them on paper, this is probably the first time the last 5 years, maybe, where you look at their offensive line and you think that's not as solid as I thought it was. There's some questions at left tackle. There was a question at left tackle last year before they brought on Eric Fisher, and that, they didn't quite get the return from that they expected. Right guard is interesting. Mark Lewinsky's gone. You've taken that old starting five and kind of chopped it down to the remaining three. So I think there's some questions there. We've talked about receiver already. The fact that they're picking in the second round, you think about the depth of the draft. Receiver is a very deep position. They don't really need any edge rushing help. Not after they went out and got Ngakoue and paired him with Kwity Paye. So that's one of the other deeper positions that's already addressed. My other big need for them, cornerback. I mean, if you look at them on paper as well, you get rid of Rock Ya-Sin, who I don't think lived up to the expectations they had for him, which is part of why they were convinced to trade him. The departure of him leaves a little bit of a hole. They have Brandon Facyson, but I think they could stand to add there as well. They had a nice little Pro Bowler in Kenny Moore, who was your slot corner. I don't think he ends up kicking outside. I think he's best suited to stay at the slot corner, and then you kind of move from there. Again, the lack of a first round pick is going to hurt them a little bit. If I had to guess, they go receiver just because of the depth of the class. There are many ways they could go. It's not a talent poor team, but they do have a few holes that they still need to fill.
Yeah, it is kind of interesting because it does seem like holes at premier positions, left tackle, cornerback. These are positions that teams go out and spend a lot of money on, or go out and spend a lot of draft resources on, Cam.
Yeah, I actually have a quick question, if I could, just listen to you with the Colts, and I'm curious what the national perspective would be. But do you view the Colts addition of Matt Ryan as enough to get them over the Titans, or are they still with the holes? Some of the holes you mentioned, Nick, still short.
That's a good question. I would say yes. Quick answer, yes. You could kind of delve into some of the potential pitfalls or weaknesses of this team, but as of right now, I would say yes, because that was their biggest weakness. They didn't lose a ton of guys this offseason. They did make additions, and they certainly upgraded at quarterback. And the thing I like the most about the addition of Matt Ryan is the fact that he's got experience. I mean, he's not nicknamed Matty Ice for just no reason. I mean, the guy knows how to play under pressure, and he's stepping into a situation that hasn't been this good for him since he was leading the Falcons to the Super Bowl. So I think he is enough. But if I want to consider them a legitimate contender beyond the AFC South to get deep into the AFC playoffs, they're still going to need to add somebody else.
It's a great point. And a conversation full of them right there with Cameron Wolfe and Nick Shook, setting us straight on the AFC North and the AFC South, and finishing up our roster reset series. Thanks very much, fellas.